I don't remember exactly when I first heard about the train lost in the woods. Maybe it was a rumor drifting through the town bar, or something my grandfather half-whispered once, late at night, when his mind was slipping between memories and nightmares. But once it lodged in my head, it wouldn't leave. A passenger train, vanished decades ago without a trace, its metal shells swallowed by the forest, its passengers never found. The thought scratched at me like a nail against soft wood, restless and insistent. It started with small things. A newspaper clipping buried in the library archives, yellowed and brittle. Local train missing, rescue teams dispatched. No follow-up. Then an old black and white photo of men in heavy coats, standing beside rails that led nowhere, expressions twisted in worry and fear. And a single entry in a dusty logbook. Engine 109. Last departure, October 12, 1957. Status, unknown. I could have let it go, told myself it was just one of many disappearances in those wild decades, but the silence around it felt too deliberate, as though people had agreed never to speak of what happened. So I gathered what scraps I could, packed my camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, and drove toward the forest that was rumored to have swallowed an entire train. The dirt road ended sooner than I expected, choked by roots and fallen branches. The air smelled wet, earthy, as though it had rained not long ago. I stepped out, feeling the weight of the woods press against me, and started walking along the barely visible path that locals said might lead to the old track. The deeper I went, the quieter it grew, until even my own footsteps seemed too loud, like an intruder's. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe. The trees grew denser, shadows tangled together, and my breath came sharp and ragged. Just as I began to doubt myself, I saw it. A rusted curve of rail poking through moss and leaves. I followed it, heart pounding, until I saw the first car. It leaned slightly to the left as if the forest itself was trying to pull it down. Rust ran like dark veins across its sides, and shattered windows gaped like blind eyes. I climbed the steps, the metal groaning under my weight, and pushed open the door. Inside it smelled of wet wood, mold, and something older, like rotting paper and rusted iron. Rows of seats, ripped and mildewed, lined either side of a narrow aisle. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling around the beam of my flashlight. I saw old suitcases still tucked under seats, rotted leather straps barely holding them together. A child's shoe lay alone on the floor, black with age. The further I moved, the stronger the sense that I wasn't alone. It wasn't a sound or movement, just the prickling at the back of my neck, the uneasy weight of unseen eyes. I forced myself forward, seat by seat, until I reached the end of the car. Beyond, more cars stretched into the shadows, swallowed by vines and twisted branches that had forced their way through shattered windows. The train was longer than I expected, as though it had grown in the dark, fed by stories and fear. I stepped into the next car and froze. Someone had written words across the walls in something dark and flaking. "It sees you," it read, letters uneven, as though scratched by shaking hands. My breath caught in my throat. I turned, scanning the seats, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. A few rows down, something caught my light, a book lying open on a seat. I picked it up carefully. The cover was cracked and the pages were warped with moisture, but I could still read the handwriting. It was a journal, dated from the last days before the train disappeared. The writer spoke of strange noises at night, tapping on windows, voices whispering through the corridors. Passengers began to see shadows moving just beyond sight. Some grew paranoid, accusing others of following them, of watching as they slept. Then the entries grew frantic, the handwriting jagged. "We can't get off," one page read. "It won't stop. It doesn't want us to leave." I felt the chill creep down my spine. The writer never signed their name, but on the final page, scrawled in letters almost torn through the paper, it said, "If you find this, don't stay. The train is hungry." A sound broke the silence then, a soft scrape, like cloth against metal. My flashlight swung around wildly, catching only empty seats and shadows that danced just beyond reach. My breath came fast, chest tight. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself. Maybe the wind. But the air was dead still. I shoved the journal into my bag and pushed deeper into the train, curiosity and dread tangled together. In the next car, I found more signs that people had been trapped here. Old blankets, scattered belongings, food cans rusted through. On the walls, scratches that looked like they'd been made by fingernails, some deep, desperate, as if whoever made them knew no one would ever find them. I kept moving, each step heavier, the air thicker. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, the shadows seemed to gather, pressing closer, almost solid. Then the light steadied, and they were gone. At the center of the train, I found something worse. A compartment door, shut tight, its handle rusted. Someone had nailed boards across it from the outside, and across the wood, more words. "Do not open. It waits." I hesitated, breath shaking. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but my hand moved on its own, fingers brushing the wood. The boards were old, brittle. I could break them easily. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I had to see. Maybe part of me hoped there'd be nothing inside and I could convince myself the stories were lies. I pulled at the boards. They snapped with a dry crack, falling to the floor. The door creaked open, revealing darkness so deep my flashlight barely cut into it. Inside was a single figure, hunched in the far corner, clothes rotted and fused to bone. The skull turned toward me, and empty sockets seemed to lock on to mine. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor, my breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a scream. Then something shifted behind the corpse, a shadow, darker than darkness itself. It pulsed, almost alive, and a whisper slid across the compartment. "Stay." I stumbled back, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my hand. The whisper came again, softer, almost pleading. "Stay." I turned and ran, feet slipping on the rotted floor, breath burning in my chest. Behind me, the shadows seemed to stretch, reaching, following. I didn't stop until I burst from the last car into the damp, cold air of the forest. The trees felt less threatening now, the open sky above like salvation. I gulped in the scent of moss and wet leaves, trying to steady my racing heart. When I finally dared to look back, the train stood silent, half swallowed by vines and darkness. It hadn't moved, but the sense of watching eyes lingered, crawling across my skin like cold fingers. I thought about running then, leaving and never coming back. But the journal in my bag felt heavy, as though the story inside wasn't finished, as though the train itself had let me leave, this time. And deep inside, against all reason, curiosity burned stronger than fear. I knew I'd come back. It took me 3 days to work up the nerve to go back. 3 days of pacing around my apartment, replaying the sound of that whisper in my head, the memory of empty eye sockets locked on mine.
Every instinct told me to burn the journal, forget the tracks, pretend I'd never found the train. But the journal pulled at me. At night, I'd catch myself reading the frantic scrawls again, searching for meaning, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than the final madness of a trapped mind. But it wasn't. I could feel it. The story wasn't done, and part of me, stubborn, reckless, or simply doomed, needed to see what waited deeper in those shadows. The morning I left, the sky was iron gray, clouds hanging low enough to touch. I parked at the same spot where the road ended, the forest standing silent and cold around me. My boots crunched over fallen branches and wet leaves, every sound echoing too loud in the hush. It felt different this time, like the woods knew I was coming.
The tracks were still there, rusty veins running through the moss. The first sight of the train, half devoured by vines, sent a shiver down my spine. But there was something else now, something I hadn't noticed before. Marks in the ground, footprints, or what looked like them. Recent. Someone else had been here. My chest tightened, but I forced myself forward, climbing the broken steps and stepping into the dark. The smell hit me again, wet rot, old iron, and a hint of something sweeter, more sickly. I swept my flashlight across the seats. Dust motes danced, but everything seemed unchanged. The same torn seats, the same child's shoe lying abandoned. As I moved, the silence grew thicker, pressing on my ears like deep water. My own breath sounded too loud, each step crunching on broken glass and gravel. I passed the place where I'd found the journal, the memory flickering sharp and vivid. The boards I'd torn down still lay on the floor, the broken door hanging open. I didn't look inside. Further into the train, the air grew colder. My breath fogged, and the beam of my light caught something new. Scratches on the walls, fresher than the others. "We see you," they read. Letters gouged deep into the metal, flakes of rust and paint curling outward. My mouth went dry. Who had written that? And when? I kept moving, the fear in my gut twisting tighter with every step. Halfway through the next car, my flashlight caught movement. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs, but saw only shadows and broken seats. My ears strained for sound, but the silence pressed in thicker than before, swallowing even my breathing. I forced my feet forward, step by step. Past the broken windows, past old luggage slumped in the aisles like forgotten corpses. The air smelled worse here, heavier, tinged with something coppery and metallic. At the far end, a door hung ajar. Beyond it, a compartment I hadn't dared to enter last time. My hand shook as I pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the walls were covered in writing, pages torn from notebooks, letters, photographs pinned with rusted nails. Faces stared out at me, black and white, eyes wide with something like fear or sorrow. Words scribbled over them in frantic loops. It watches. It waits. It feeds. In the center of the compartment lay a bundle of rags. As my light settled on it, the rags shifted. My breath caught. It wasn't rags at all. It was a body curled into itself, skin gray and brittle, hair matted and patchy. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to step closer. The corpse looked old, impossibly old, but something about it felt wrong. Too dry, too light, as if whatever had been alive had already been devoured, leaving only a husk. Then I saw it, a notebook clutched in its hand, the pages stiff and brown with age. I reached out, every nerve screaming not to touch it, and gently pried the book free. The handwriting inside was different from the first journal, sharper, neater, at least at first. I hear them at night. They whisper behind the walls. I thought I could escape, but the train won't let me go. Further in, the writing twisted into jagged scrawls. It wears our faces. It walks where we walked. It is not alone. My mouth felt dry as dust. It wears our faces. The words echoed in my mind, cold as grave dirt. A sound behind me snapped me around. The train door stood open, darkness pooling beyond it. My flashlight beam jittered, catching nothing but empty seats and broken glass. I stepped out, every sense straining, the hairs on my arms prickling. The silence had changed. Before, it had felt empty. Now it felt watchful, like something just beyond sight was holding its breath. As I moved, the train itself seemed to close around me. The shadows stretched, swallowing corners of the car I'd already passed. My light flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw someone standing at the far end. Tall, thin, head tilted as if listening. Then the beam steadied, and it was gone. I kept walking, faster now, boots scuffing the floor. My heartbeat thudded loud in my ears. At the junction between cars, I paused. A shape lay slumped across the threshold, a jacket, torn and moldy. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't empty. A skull grinned up at me from inside the collar, empty sockets dark and endless. And beside it, scratched into the floor, a single word: run. The whisper came again then, closer this time, curling around my ears like cold breath. Stay. My pulse spiked. I stumbled back, almost falling over broken seats. The shadows seemed to shift, pooling thicker at the corners of my vision. I turned and ran. The train blurred around me, rusted walls, broken windows, flashes of rotten cloth and bone. My breath tore in my chest, raw and ragged. Behind me, something moved. Not footsteps exactly, more like the scrape of cloth over metal, soft and steady, matching my panicked pace. I burst out into the forest, stumbling over roots, my lungs burning. The trees loomed, silent and ancient, but the sense of eyes on me didn't fade. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing beside a moss-choked stump. My breath came in ragged gasps, chest heaving. When I finally looked back, the train stood where I'd left it, half swallowed by the forest. Still, silent, watching. The journals weighed heavy in my bag. Proof I wasn't imagining it. Proof something had happened and was still happening. That night, in my apartment, I read both journals again by the dull glow of a single lamp. The newer one spoke of passengers seeing each other in places they shouldn't be, at the wrong end of the train or outside when they should have been inside. Of voices calling to them in familiar tones, only to vanish when followed. It wears our faces.
That phrase repeated over and over, sometimes scrawled so violently it tore the page. My reflection in the window seemed to watch me differently then. The darkness behind the glass deep and hungry. I tried to sleep, but dreams twisted around me, faces without eyes, long corridors that stretched on forever, and the sense of something old and hollow breathing at my back. I woke just before dawn, sweat cold on my skin. And I knew what I had to do. If the train truly trapped them, if something inside wore their faces and whispered with stolen voices, then there had to be something deeper, something buried further down the tracks, something that explained why the train had never let them go. The fear hadn't faded, but curiosity burned hotter, almost feverish. I packed my bag again. Flashlight, water, both journals, and this time, a crowbar. Because this time, I wouldn't just look. I'd force the truth into the light. And maybe, just maybe, I'd survive long enough to tell the world what I'd found. By the time I reached the tracks again, dawn had barely broken. The forest stood silent, dew clinging to the moss like sweat on dying skin. I stepped onto the rusted rails, the metal, cold even through my boots. Every part of me screamed to turn back, but the journals weighed heavy in my backpack, an anchor to what I'd already seen. I walked fast, the trees pressing in from both sides. The air felt wrong, too still, as if even the birds were holding their breath. Each step brought me deeper into the hush, until the world felt miles away. The train came into view like a wound in the forest, rusted, broken, and yet somehow alive, as if it had been waiting for me all night. I climbed the steps, flashlight tight in my fist, breath already ragged. The wood groaned under my weight. Inside, the air smelled stronger, wet iron and old rot. The shadows seemed to curl around me, greedy and patient. I moved slowly, passing the seats, my light catching scraps of torn cloth and pale bone. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Further down, the familiar compartments lay in ruin. But something had changed. At the far end, a new door stood ajar, a faint light seeping out like a dying candle. I stepped closer, the floor trembling beneath my feet. The light flickered, revealing more writing scrawled across the walls. It remembers. It hungers. We can't leave. My mouth felt dry as ash. I pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a compartment I hadn't seen before. Dark wood panels, a single cracked window spilling dawn light across the floor. And at the center, a shape crouched beside a pile of bones. It turned, and I froze. It wore my face. Pale, hollow-eyed, skin stretched too tight over bone, but unmistakably me. It opened its mouth, and my own voice echoed back, "You shouldn't have come." The air thickened, tasting of metal and earth. My hand shook, the flashlight beam jittering across the walls. The other me stepped closer, its movements wrong, joints bending at strange angles like a puppet pulled by too many strings. I stumbled back, breath catching in my throat. My mind scrabbled for sense, but nothing fit. The journals warned me it wears our faces. The thing smiled, a slow, splitting grin that tore at the corners of its lips. We waited, it rasped, voice cracking like old wood. And you came back. Behind it, shapes moved in the dark. More figures, half-formed, half-human. Empty-eyed passengers draped in torn uniforms and rotten dresses. Their mouths opened in silence, and I felt their gaze crawl across my skin like insects. The other me raised a hand, long fingers curling inward. "You belong now," it whispered. "No," I croaked, voice shaking. "I'm leaving." Its head tilted, bones cracking. "There's nowhere else." I turned and ran, slamming through the door, breath tearing from my lungs. The train shuddered around me, metal groaning like a living thing. Shadows writhed at the corners of my eyes, shapes following just beyond the beam of my light. I stumbled through the cars, heart hammering. Doors slammed shut behind me. Seats seemed to shift, blocking my path. I kicked them aside, splinters biting into my legs. Ahead, a shape loomed, another figure wearing my face, this one older, its skin sagging and gray. Its eyes were wet holes, black as oil. It reached for me, fingers twitching like broken wires. I swung my flashlight, the metal cracking against its skull. The thing reeled back, letting out a rattling hiss. I bolted past it, lungs burning. At the far end, the last car waited, my only way out. I threw myself through the door and stopped dead. The car was wrong, longer than it should have been, stretching on, lined with mirrors cracked and darkened by age. My reflection stared back at me, over and over, each copy twisted, faces blurred or missing eyes. "Go back," the echoes whispered, my own voice bouncing off the glass. "Go back, go back." "No," I whispered, voice breaking. I stepped forward, the mirrors rippling as if they were water. My reflections twisted, mouths opening in silent screams. The air smelled of rot and rust, thick enough to choke. At the end of the car, a door waited, wreathed in shadows. But between me and it, something massive coiled in the dark, a shape too big, too still. My light found it, a mass of flesh stitched from countless bodies, faces fused together in silent agony. Eyes blinked blindly, mouths moved in soundless prayer. And at its heart, a figure stood tall and thin, skin the color of bruised wax. Its head tilted, watching me. It spoke without moving its mouth. "You've seen us. Now you're part of us." My legs trembled. "What are you?" I rasped. It stepped closer, shadows clinging to its skin like smoke. "We are the memory, the hunger left behind, passengers that never left." "Why me?" "You came back, and you brought us voices." "The journals." My chest tightened. "What do you want?" It leaned forward, empty eyes inches from mine. "To be remembered, to be fed." The shadows surged forward, cold and heavy, pressing against my skin. My heartbeat roared in my ears, panic clawing up my throat. "No!" I screamed. I turned, smashing the mirrors with my flashlight, glass exploding around me. Reflections shattered, faces twisting in rage and sorrow. I ran, the thing's voice echoing behind me. "You can't run from what remembers you." I stumbled into the next car, falling hard on rotted wood. The journal in my bag dug into my ribs. Voices rose around me, whispers, pleas, laughter. Shapes closed in, faces half-formed, wearing my smile, my fear.
At the very end, dawn light glowed through a broken window. I pushed up, every breath a razor in my chest. The floor shifted underfoot, splintering. Hands reached from the shadows, clawing at my clothes, cold as grave dirt. I threw myself forward, crashing through the window in an explosion of glass and rust. The air hit me cold and sharp, and then I was rolling across wet moss and earth. When I stopped, the forest lay silent around me. The train loomed behind, rusted and still, but I could feel it, watching. I staggered to my feet, bleeding from a dozen cuts. The journals lay crushed in my bag, pages torn and wet. But I had them. I turned my back on the train, stumbling toward the faint glow of dawn beyond the trees. The whispers still clung to me, a memory that wouldn't die. Faces flickered at the edge of sight. Back in town, no one believed me. They nodded politely, eyes flat and distant. My story sounded mad even to my own ears, but the journals were real. The bruises were real. And at night, when the world grew quiet, I heard them still, my voice whispering back from the darkness. I moved apartments, changed cities, but the shadows followed. I see them in reflections, passengers and windows, pressed against the glass, watching, waiting. And in my dreams I'm back on the train, walking through endless cars that stretch beyond sight. Because once you've seen it, truly seen it, you never really leave. And maybe that's what the journals meant. The train doesn't just trap bodies, it traps memories, faces, voices. And now, somewhere in that rusted maze, something wears my face too, waiting for the next curious soul to step aboard. And if you're hearing this, maybe it's already watching you.